Welcome to World History. Today we're going to continue our quest east to go all the way to China and talk about the rise and fall of the Ming Dynasty, one of the most famous and important dynasties in Chinese history. Here are your objectives for today. We're going to evaluate how successful the first emperor of the Qing dynasty, the Hongwu Emperor, was. We're going to look at the ways in which the Yongle Emperor changed Chinese society. And finally, we're going to talk about the factors that led to the decline and eventual fall of the Ming Dynasty. So keep these in mind because you'll have to be answering them at the end. So without further ado, let's get started. Where we last left China, China was under the domination of the Mongol Yuan dynasty. We remember, hopefully, the Mongol conquests of most of the known world. The Mongols were incredibly good conquerors, but not particularly good rulers. And so as time went on, they ended up alienating a lot of their Chinese subjects, both with their terrible economic policies, but also their tendency to favor Mongols over the ethnically Chinese population, which outraged a whole bunch of different people. The end result of this was many rebellions, most famously the Red Turbine Rebellion, which helped to overthrow the Yuan dynasty. The Red Turbine Rebellion was led by Yuan here, who eventually was able to unite enough of China to push out the Mongols and to declare himself the Hongwu Emperor of a new dynasty that he called the Ming Dynasty. Much like many dynastic founders, the Hongwu Emperor did many, many good things during the early part of his reign. For example, he came up with a very complicated law code that helped treat all people within the empire equally. He allowed freedom of religion, which led to the expansion of Islam into the empire. He built fantastic infrastructure projects, including redredging up the Grand Canal, which is, of course, one of our classic hits for high-quality emperors. They, again, improve infrastructure. And he brought back the imperial examination system, which makes sure that the people who are serving in government are chosen based on their skills and not based on their ethnicity or family connections. So all of this is pretty good. The empire expanded. The Hongwu Emperor also issued some of the first paper money in the world, which made trade easier, and pushed for some irrigation projects, which we see down here at the bottom, which increased the amount of rice that China could harvest. And so all of these things are probably chalked up in the good category for the Hongwu Emperor. But as his rule went on, he started to struggle a little bit. In the latter half of the Hongwu Emperor's reign, he did not rule as well as he did in the early years. And so the paper money that he issued, he ended up making too much of it, leading to inflation, which we'll talk about in class. He also had to deal with rampant piracy, mostly from Japan and Korea, attacking shipping off the coast, which was very problematic because it cut into people's incomes. But probably the worst thing that the Hongwu Emperor did during his reign is he got increasingly paranoid of people trying to overthrow him. He would often issue harsh penalties for basically nothing and would kill any advisor who opposed him. This got so bad that at one point, one of his advisors, who knew that he had to tell him that his rule wasn't the things he were doing were mistakes, ended up bringing his own coffin with him to the meeting with the emperor in order to save time, because he figured the emperor would just have him executed immediately. This convinced the Hongwu Emperor to scale back a little bit on his massive purges, although he did kill thousands of people within the Chinese government during his rule. So the Hongwu Emperor left his new dynasty somewhat unstable. But fortunately, despite this instability, one of his sons was the Yongle Emperor, who turned out to be one of China's greatest rulers. After a brief civil war, the Yongle Emperor seized the mantle of Son of Heaven and donned the imperial yellow, and would go on to, again, bring the Ming Dynasty to new heights. One of the things that the Yongle Emperor is most known for is the creation of the Forbidden City, which we see pictured here. And there's a diagram of it right there. The Forbidden City is like a city within a city in the capital of Beijing. And it's a place where the emperor can meet with his advisors and have emissaries come and talk to him. It's this amazing building project that required new transportation techniques, basically freezing roads and then covering them with water to slide blocks of ice, which we can see here, in order to build this massive construction. And it allowed the emperor more control over the empire, which allows him to rule more effectively. The biggest piece of the Yongle Emperor's reign was his massive expansion of trade, specifically trade in tea, which the Chinese had been trading in for hundreds of years, but they'd recently come up with this new formulation called loose leaf tea, which was preserved much better than the old style tea cakes and created a better flavor. This tea was now the envy of the world. And what you started to see is emissaries coming from all over the world, including from Europe, showing up in China in order to try to get some of this very, very high quality Chinese tea. And so we start seeing new trade routes being opened up by the Yongle Emperor, which of course brings massive wealth and prosperity to China. In order to help expand this trade, the Yongle Emperor commissioned a Muslim subject named Zheng Ha to go on a series of voyages throughout the Indian Ocean. We can see that here. We can see that here in this map, that the Zheng Ha traveled to all of these different places. And he was given command of this massive fleet of ships whose goal was to go around and basically advertise the wealth and prosperity of China to all these other places in order to get people to come back to China and to trade with China and honestly to respect China. These ships were huge. You can see Zheng Ha's flagship here in comparison with Columbus's tiny ship down here in the corner. They were so big that they had gardens built in to the largest of the ships so they could grow their own food on voyage, and they brought back spectacular wealth to China. Zheng Ha's voyages created what's called the tribute system, by which, if you wanted access to China's amazing goods, like the tea we talked about earlier, or like the fine silks and porcelain, especially this blue style of porcelain became very popular during the Ming Dynasty, you had to show up before the emperor, bow to subjugate yourself and show that you were lesser than the son of heaven, and bring valuable gifts, like, giraffes, or other things that would please the Chinese emperor, and then he would allow you to trade on a limited basis with China. This again significantly increased China's wealth and prestige, as everyone was desperate to bring giraffes in order to get, silk and porcelain and other valuable Chinese goods. All of this led to a golden age in China, where you see the growth of architecture, art, and literature like China had never seen before. They built this amazing glass or porcelain tower that unfortunately was struck by lightning and was destroyed, but apparently it was one of the wonders of the world, and China is trying to rebuild this porcelain tower, and so hopefully someday we'll get to see it. And the Yongle Emperor composed one of the world's first encyclopedias, trying to combine together all of human knowledge to preserve it for the future. And so during this period, China reached one of its cultural heights and was one of the most important places in the world. But it was not to last. As always, eventually things start to go south, and for China, the problem again was warlike tribes on their northern border, which were invading into China, causing the emperor to have to respond. And so the emperors, later Ming emperors, built what is known as the Ming Great Wall. It's the Great Wall, the parts of the Great Wall that are still standing today, in order to try to stop these barbarian invasions. Unfortunately, of course, wall building is incredibly expensive, and you have to force lots of people to do it, and it's really dangerous, and so it slowly drained the Chinese treasury and made the people pretty unhappy with these Ming emperors. Finally, the Tu Mu incident represented the weakness of late Ming Dynasty China, where the Emperor Yingzhang, leading a group of troops across the Great Wall, ends up getting captured by barbarian tribesmen. With the emperor captured, local control starts to fall apart, and the whole Chinese system goes into decline. This period of decline is heightened by the rule of the Wanli Emperor, who again follows all of our tropes of bad emperors. He spends most of his money building luxury tombs for himself to be buried in. He's incredibly fat and simply enjoys feasting all the time. And he punishes loyal officials for trying to point out his flaws. The most famous example of this is the official Hai Rei, who was exiled and had his family killed for daring to tell the Wanli Emperor that he probably shouldn't be spending all day feasting and should instead be, caring for the people and ruling appropriately. All of this corruption leads to the flood controls and the infrastructure starting to fall apart, and so you see devastating floods, and you start seeing a lot of uprisings. And so always floods and uprisings start to herald the end of the dynasty, and the Ming Dynasty falls into decline and eventually is going to be overthrown. So this brings us back to our objectives. Take a moment and make sure you can answer these in some detail. And when we come back tomorrow, we'll be looking at the successor dynasty to the Ming Dynasty, the Qing Dynasty.